I agreed to this one last blind date, but I can see this will be a waste of time. Let's get this over with.
Sometimes, one story is enough to change a heart forever. Welcome to Heart Change Stories.
Cold Millionaire CEO agreed to one last blind date. The girl who showed up changed his life forever. The rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the upscale French restaurant nestled in the heart of Manhattan. Inside, warm golden light spilled from elegant chandeliers, casting soft glows onto white linen tablecloths and crystal glassware. A string quartet played something classical and distant, just loud enough to fill the silence between strangers. Ethan Ward, 33, sat alone at a corner table, his posture straight, his navy suit impeccably tailored. He glanced at his watch, then at the entrance. His expression remained unchanged, cool, indifferent, practiced. A man used to waiting, but never wasting time. He did not believe in blind dates. He especially did not believe in blind dates arranged by his mother. But this was different. His mother, Grace Ward, 68, had always known how to disarm him, not with pressure or guilt, but with a quiet sadness that made him fold. She was sick now, kidney failure, slow, irreversible. So when she mentioned she had met a lovely young woman at her volunteer clinic, a woman she wished Ethan would just meet, only once, he agreed. Not because he believed in it, just to give his mother peace of mind, closure. It would be the last blind date he ever agreed to. He had already decided, 20 minutes, then he would politely excuse himself. At precisely 7:12 p.m., the door opened. A woman stepped in, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. Lily Harper. She wore a simple dark green dress with sleeves down to her elbows. No makeup. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose twist, strands framing a face that was more sincere than beautiful. Her eyes, gray with a hint of blue, searched the room until they met his. She smiled. It was not a dazzling smile. It was a warm, steady one, as if she had nothing to prove. Ethan stood, nodded, pulled out her chair, polite, distant. "Mr. Ward," she said softly. "Ethan is fine," he replied. "Thank you for coming." She sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. The waiter brought menus, poured water, disappeared. "I know this probably isn't your thing," she said, her voice light but clear. "To be honest, it's not mine either." He looked up, one eyebrow slightly raised. "My name is Lily," she continued. "Your mom talks about you constantly. I feel like I know your coffee order and how you organize your socks." He blinked. "That sounds unsettling." She laughed, but not nervously. "I promise I'm not a stalker. I work with your mother at the clinic sometimes. I teach elementary school and volunteer a few nights a week." He nodded slowly, still watching her, like one might observe an unexpected variable. "I did not come here to impress you," she said plainly. "I didn't dress up. I didn't Google your company. I don't have a plan to sweep you off your feet." There was no flirtation in her voice, no ambition, just a kind of open clarity that made Ethan pause. "I came because your mother asked me to," Lily finished, "and I trust her judgment more than I trust dating apps or fate." Ethan stared at her for a moment longer. Something in her honesty, her total lack of pretension, unsettled his carefully guarded instincts. This wasn't how these things usually went. Most people performed. And yet, here she was. He glanced once more at the door, out of habit, not hesitation. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, and stayed. The silence between them lingered for a moment after the waiter left. Outside, the rain had softened into a misty drizzle, blurring the city lights like a watercolor painting. Lily looked up, folding her hands gently on the table. "So, Ethan, what exactly does a day in the life of a CEO look like?" Ethan's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You mean before or after I cancel meetings, fire someone, and read 30 emails about things I already said no to?" She laughed, genuine, light, without the usual edge of trying too hard. I knew there'd be emails. There are always emails. He found himself studying her. Most people ask that question to be polite. She asked it because she was curious, and he could tell the difference. And you? He asked. Teaching 3rd grade. That can't be peaceful. She grinned. It depends on your definition of peaceful. If peaceful means 28 children arguing about whether Pluto is still a planet, then yes, very. He chuckled under his breath, surprised at how easily the sound came. It's exhausting sometimes, she admitted, but I love it. Kids are honest, raw even. They don't care about appearances or status. They just want to be safe and heard. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, not in a performative way, but like the light came from somewhere deep and quiet inside her. They trust you? Ethan asked. They trust whoever shows up and stays. He didn't expect that answer. It sat with him, heavier than he thought it would. Some of my kids come to school hungry, she continued softly. One of my boys eats half his lunch and saves the rest for his baby sister. Another girl sleeps through math because she's up all night caring for her mom. Ethan's fingers tapped once against his glass, then stopped. What do you do when you can't fix any of that? He asked. I do what I can, she said simply. I make sure they feel seen. I listen. I remind them they matter. Her voice didn't tremble, but it didn't need to. The weight of her words was enough. And when that's not enough, she smiled a little sadly. Then I still show up the next day. He sat back slightly, the line hitting him somewhere personal, somewhere he hadn't let anyone touch in a long time. You know, she added, reaching for her water. My biggest dream isn't anything grand. I just want to make sure every kid in my class gets breakfast before math. That stopped him. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. No talk of promotions, no big ambitions, no empire to build, just breakfast. For children, before math. Ethan looked at her, really looked. His world was built on leverage, on outcomes. Her world was built on presence, on enough. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. The waiter returned briefly, clearing plates. Lily had barely touched hers. As the server turned to leave, she called out gently, "Excuse me, could I have a to-go bag, please?" "Of course," the waiter replied, disappearing with the dish. Ethan watched her fold her napkin neatly, eyes focused, hands unhurried. There was no performance in her movements, no explanation, no apology. When the bag came, she stood quietly, walked over to the large window, unlatched it, and leaned just enough to slip the food outside. Ethan turned his head. Across the street, half hidden under a scaffolding tarp, a man huddled against the building, knees pulled to his chest. Lily crossed through the rain to him, crouched, and offered the bag. She didn't linger. She didn't say anything loud enough to hear. The man took it with shaking hands. She touched his shoulder, just briefly, then walked back in. By the time she sat down again, Ethan's expression had changed. He didn't speak. Something had cracked open in him, quietly, like a window letting in air he didn't know he needed. People in his world didn't notice hunger. They certainly didn't share their dinner. She hadn't made a speech. She hadn't tried to impress him. She had simply seen someone and acted. That small act, a simple bag of food, moved him in a way that contracts and capital never had. And for the second time that night, Ethan forgot to check his watch. He just stayed. The rain had grown heavier by the time they stepped out of the restaurant. Ethan instinctively reached for his umbrella, holding it open as he turned to Lily. "Can I give you a ride home?" he asked, his voice even, neutral. She hesitated, glancing down the block as if weighing her options. "That's kind of you, but I was just going to take the train." A sudden gust sent the rain sideways, tugging at her coat and clinging to her hair. Ethan didn't push. He simply stood still, holding the umbrella over both of them. Lily let out a breath. Okay, maybe just this once. He opened the passenger door for her, and she stepped in without another word. The car ride back was quiet, not tense, not awkward, just quiet. Ethan drove, eyes on the road, but mind elsewhere. Lily sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes watching the city melt behind raindrops. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, didn't talk to fill the silence. She just sat, calm, present. It was oddly disarming, and, to Ethan's surprise, he found himself glancing at her in the mirror longer than he meant to. He dropped her off at an old brick building. She turned to him with a quiet smile. Thanks for the ride, Ethan. And for not leaving right away. Before he could answer, she was out of the car and gone. He drove off, already deciding he wouldn't see her again. He was wrong. The very next morning, Ethan was in East Harlem, clipboard in hand, surveying a potential site for a new development. His assistant talked about permits, but Ethan wasn't listening. Laughter drifted over a low fence. He turned his head. There, in a concrete yard filled with cracked chalk lines and children's backpacks, was Lily. Surrounded by a small group of children, she held a little girl in her arms, brown-haired, legs curled unevenly beneath her. A walker leaned against the fence. Ethan froze, not in awe, but in something quieter, recognition, perhaps. The girl pointed. Hey, that's the handsome guy from last night, Miss Lily. Every head turned. Lily looked over, surprised, then smiled, helplessly. Come say hi, a boy yelled. Another tugged at Lily's sleeve. Is he your boyfriend? The class erupted in giggles. Next thing he knew, Ethan was inside the gate, surrounded by small hands and sticky fingers. Someone slapped a sticker on his blazer. He didn't object. Lily set the girl, Anna, apparently, onto a foam mat and helped her balance. Anna beamed up at Ethan. You don't look so serious in person. That made Lily laugh, and Ethan too. He didn't realize how long he stayed. He crouched beside a boy building a crooked tower of blocks, answered questions about his car. Someone asked if he knew Taylor Swift. Lily stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching him. Not suspiciously, curiously. When a small bell rang, Lily clapped her hands. All right, my loves, clean up time. The kids scattered with practiced joy. Ethan rose, brushing grass off his coat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. I'd like to make a donation, he said, holding out a few bills. But Lily stepped forward, laying a gentle hand on his. I don't take money from people who think they can buy their way into this. Her voice wasn't harsh, just firm. Ethan paused, caught off guard. She met his eyes. If you want to help, really help, then show up, be real. These kids aren't here to make you feel better about yourself. There was no bitterness, just truth. Slowly, Ethan tucked the money back into his coat. The kids were watching. He felt their eyes. And for the first time in a long while, he felt humbled. She had drawn a line, not to push him away, but to protect something sacred. And he understood. Okay, he said softly. Lily nodded and turned to help Anna inside. Ethan stood a moment longer, alone in the schoolyard, surrounded by chalk drawings and mismatched coats, and he realized he didn't want last night to be the end. Ethan hadn't intended to look into her. But after that second unexpected encounter at the school, after hearing Anna call his name and watching Lily in her element, something in him shifted. Curiosity turned into something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. He told himself it was just due diligence, a habit, a reflex. So, he asked his assistant to run a quiet background check. Nothing invasive, just information. It came back the next morning in a neat report, tucked inside a manila folder. He read it, alone in his office. Lily Harper, bachelor's degree in economics, summa cum laude, accepted into a prestigious analyst program at a top financial firm straight out of college, then withdrew 2 weeks before her start date. No explanation. Instead, she moved to a smaller neighborhood, took up a teaching position at a public elementary school, and became a registered foster guardian for 2 minors. Anna was one of them. And then, there was the footnote. Previously engaged to a well-known venture capitalist, Ethan recognized the name. The man was powerful, charming, successful, and privately notorious for cheating and questionable deals. Lily had ended the engagement 6 months before the wedding, publicly, without a word to the press. Ethan stared at the folder, jaw tense. She could have had a life much closer to his. Money, travel, influence. But she'd chosen something entirely different, and stuck with it. He felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Respect. Not the kind he gave board members or market strategists. A different kind. One that made him sit back, breathe deeper. He didn't tell her what he knew. Instead, he made a call. 2 days later, a sealed envelope arrived at Lily's classroom, containing a fully funded grant for new equipment, sensory learning tools, and an assistant teacher for her special needs students. It was issued by a private education foundation. No name, no credit. He assumed she would accept it quietly. He assumed wrong. Later that week, she showed up at the front desk of his office building. No appointment, no call, just her and a folded envelope in hand. Security called him upstairs. He came down immediately. She was standing by the marble lobby windows, arms crossed tightly over her chest, raincoat dripping on the tile. "You paid for this?" she asked the moment he approached. Ethan hesitated. It was anonymous. "Not anonymous enough," she said, holding up the grant letter. "I asked around." He didn't deny it. "You meant well," she said, voice firm. "But this isn't how you help." "It was never about recognition," he replied. "I didn't even expect you to find out." "That's not the point." She took a step closer. "If you want to support what I do, then show up. Be present. Ask what we need. Don't throw money at it like you're solving a spreadsheet error." Her eyes burned, not with rage, but with something more painful. Disappointment. "I thought you were starting to understand," she said quietly. Ethan stood still, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. No one had ever rejected his help like this. Not once. It stung in a way he didn't expect. But more than that, it made him think. Really think. He opened his mouth to explain, then closed it again. Instead, he gave her the smallest nod. Not of agreement. Of understanding. Lily didn't wait for more. She turned and walked out into the misting rain, envelope still in hand. Ethan watched her go. And for a long time afterward, he stayed there, silent in the center of polished glass and stone, questioning, perhaps for the first time, what it truly meant to give. The call came just after 5 a.m. Ethan sat up in bed, disoriented. He almost didn't answer. But when he saw the hospital's name flash across the screen, his heart dropped. "Mr. Ward," the nurse said gently, "your mother's condition has worsened. We've moved her into intensive care. You should come now." 20 minutes later, Ethan was pacing the sterile hallway outside the ICU, coat half-buttoned, tie forgotten in his hand. His breathing was uneven, hands clenched into fists at his sides. He hadn't felt this helpless in years. He had built empires, moved markets, bought out entire companies with the stroke of a pen. But in this moment, he was just a son. And he couldn't fix her. The doctor emerged with soft words. Complications from heart failure, nothing definitive yet. Ethan nodded blankly. then sat down on the plastic chair near the vending machines, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He barely noticed when someone approached. It was Lily. She wore a simple sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. She didn't say a word, just sat beside him for a moment before quietly slipping into his mother's room. Ethan stood at the door, not following, just watching. Lily took Grace's frail hand in hers. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she began to hum, a soft, familiar lullaby. Her voice, low, steady, full of something he couldn't name, filled the small room. Grace's chest rose and fell slowly. And then, for the first time since the machine started beeping, she smiled in her sleep. Ethan felt something crack inside him. He turned away and let the tears fall, silent, raw, unhidden. She had been there, not just now, but all along, for his mother, for Anna, for him, and he'd nearly pushed her away. A week later, the morning was unusually cold for early spring. Ethan was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting, one that had taken weeks to prepare. The boardroom was filled with executives, screens lit up with projections and pitch decks. His phone buzzed once, then again, and again. It was the school. He excused himself quickly, stepping into the hallway. The voice on the other end was panicked. "Mr. Ward, this is Principal Alvarez. Anna Harper, one of our students, was in an accident outside the school. We tried calling Miss Lily, but we couldn't reach her. Anna listed you as her emergency contact." Ethan didn't hesitate. The meeting dissolved behind him like smoke. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't care. By the time he arrived, the paramedics were just placing Anna on a stretcher. Her leg was bleeding, scraped and bruised. Her face was pale. "I'm here," Ethan said firmly, pushing through the crowd. "I'm with her." Anna reached out blindly until her fingers found his. "Uncle Ethan." "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you, sweetheart." He rode with her in the ambulance, holding her hand the entire time, brushing the hair from her forehead, promising it would be okay, even though he was terrified. When they arrived at the hospital, he refused to let anyone else carry her. He lifted her himself, cradling her like something fragile and sacred. Doctors and nurses exchanged surprised glances. So did two teachers who had followed the ambulance. Wasn't that Ethan Ward? What was he doing here? They didn't know. But Lily did. She arrived breathless, eyes wild, just as Ethan was stepping out of the exam room. Their eyes met across the hall. She looked at him, at the blood on his sleeves, the worry carved into his face, and stopped in her tracks. "Is she okay?" she asked, barely more than a whisper. He nodded. "She'll be fine. They're stitching her up now." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily's gaze dropped to his hands, still trembling slightly, and the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. She crossed to him slowly, and when she reached him, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because in Ethan's eyes, wet, red, and utterly unguarded, she saw the man he truly was becoming. Not the CEO, not the fixer, just a man who had chosen to show up when it mattered. For her, for Anna, for love. And in that moment, the ice that had wrapped itself around his life for so long began to melt. The hospital had grown quiet. Visiting hours were long over, and most of the lights in the pediatric wing were dimmed to a soft glow. Nurses walked slowly, voices hushed, monitors beeping steadily in the background. Ethan sat on the hard bench just outside Anna's room, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. His blazer lay folded beside him. The sleeves of his shirt were still damp from the rain, his dress shoes scuffed from running through the schoolyard. Across from him, Lily sat in silence. She had arrived in a blur of panic and guilt, but now that Anna was safe, sedated, and resting behind the glass, she simply stayed. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't try to explain the days of distance between them. She just sat beside him, Ethan didn't push. He didn't expect words. He was too exhausted to reach for them himself. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, he stood and disappeared briefly down the hall, returning with 2 paper cups of water. He handed one to her. She took it wordlessly. Then, noticing her shoulders tense, he removed his coat and gently placed it around her. She blinked at the gesture, lips parting slightly, but didn't refuse. Later, her head drifted to one side, eyelids heavy. When she finally fell asleep, curled up on the bench, knees drawn to her chest, Ethan didn't move. He remained upright, watching the door to Anna's room like a soldier on night watch. And when dawn broke through the window, pale and cold, he was still there. Lily stirred, stretching slowly. She opened her eyes to find him just a few feet away. He hadn't slept. Dark circles framed his eyes, and stubble dotted his jaw. But he wasn't staring off blankly, as she expected. He was watching Anna, a faint softness on his face, something almost paternal. Then she noticed something else. His hand. It rested gently on the edge of the hospital bed, his fingers intertwined with Anna's tiny ones. Lily sat up, the coat falling from her shoulders. "You stayed all night?" Ethan turned to her. His voice was low, but steady. "She kept squeezing my hand every time I tried to let go." Lily looked at him, and for the first time, her gaze didn't carry the guarded edge it once did. There was something else there now. Gratitude. And something deeper. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "I know." A pause. "I'm not like you, Lily," he added, eyes flicking down to the floor. "I don't know how to be this selfless, this good." She frowned gently. "That's not true." He shook his head slightly. "I've spent most of my life solving problems with money or contracts or leverage, but last night, none of that mattered. I couldn't buy my way through it. I couldn't control anything." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "But I could be there, and I wanted to be." She stared at him, heart slowing with every word. "I don't know what kind of man I'm becoming," he said, voice quieter now, "but I know I don't want to become it without you." Lily's throat tightened. There was no dramatic plea. No sweeping declaration. Just a man who had chosen to stay. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear not to. For a moment, neither of them moved. No embrace, no kiss. Just silence. The kind that held everything they didn't need to say out loud. And in that silence, something fragile but unbreakable began to form between them. The beginnings of trust. Of healing, of something that might finally resemble love. Anna stirred behind the glass, shifting in her sleep. Ethan looked toward the door again, his hand still in hers. And Lily looked at him, not as a powerful man or a broken one, but as the one who had stayed when it counted. The one who had been enough. Without saying another word, she reached for his other hand and held it. That was all. The event was held at a newly renovated community center, once an abandoned warehouse, now transformed into a bright, open space, filled with artwork, folding chairs, and curious reporters. A large banner stretched across the front of the room. Equity in education. A vision for every child. Ethan stood at the podium, dressed in a dark blazer, no tie. He looked calm, composed, but there was something new in his posture, a quiet pride that hadn't been there before. Beside him stood Lily in a navy dress, hair pinned back loosely. She wasn't there for appearances. She hadn't even wanted to attend at first. But Ethan had asked her, not as a symbol, not as a gesture, but as a partner. When the crowd settled, Ethan began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice carrying with natural command. "Thank you for being here. Today isn't about my company or my investments or any headline. It's about something that started very small, and someone who reminded me that small things matter. There were murmurs, camera clicks, pens poised mid-air. I've spent most of my life building things, he continued, but lately I've realized the most important things don't get built with contracts, they get built with care. He glanced at Lily. And with courage. Reporters shifted, a few raised eyebrows. This wasn't the Ethan Ward they knew. That's why today, I'm proud to announce a long-term partnership with local public schools and nonprofits to fund classrooms, assist special education programs, and support teachers working with children who are often overlooked. Applause rippled through the room. But this isn't just about funding, he added. It's about listening. It's about showing up. He turned slightly, extending a hand toward Lily. And it's about learning from people who show up every single day. Gasps stirred when Lily stepped forward. Ethan looked directly at the cameras. This is Lily Harper, he said. She's a teacher, a community leader, and the reason I remembered what it means to care beyond convenience. Lily's cheeks flushed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The pride in Ethan's voice said everything. For a moment, silence hung, full and bright. Then, applause. But it wasn't over. A figure rose from the second row. Grace Ward. Slim, elegant, with a soft scarf wrapped over her shoulders, she stepped up with the help of a cane, her posture frail but her voice unwavering. I'm Ethan's mother, she said, and the room quieted instantly. She turned to Lily. And I've never been prouder of my son than I am today. Not because of a project or a speech, but because he found the kind of woman I've always hoped he'd meet. She smiled, eyes misting. And I would be honored, truly honored, to one day call her my daughter-in-law. The room broke into applause again, louder this time, warmer. Lily looked at Ethan, overwhelmed, tears welling up in her eyes. He leaned closer, just enough that only she could hear. I thought that blind date would be the last one of my life, he whispered, voice laced with tenderness. I never imagined it would be the beginning of everything. Lily laughed through her tears, brushing one away quickly. She didn't need a ring. She didn't need a stage. She just needed this. Him, standing beside her, no longer hiding. And for the first time, under flashing lights and watching eyes, they stood as something whole. Together, 1 year later, the once forgotten lot behind the school had transformed into a beacon of hope, its new name spelled in painted letters across the gate. Lighthouse Community Center. It was a place of laughter now, of learning, of second chances. Children ran across the courtyard, their backpacks bouncing, their laughter echoing through the wide-open space. Inside, classrooms buzzed with music and stories. Outside, in the gentle shade of an old oak tree, Lily sat on a low bench, a picture book open in her lap, as a circle of wide-eyed kids leaned in. Across the yard, Ethan was crouched down, giving a piggyback ride to a small boy with untied shoes and a contagious giggle. Ethan's face was sun-kissed, more relaxed than anyone had ever seen it. He didn't wear a suit anymore. Today, it was jeans and a rolled-up shirt, his sleeves stained with paint from helping the kids finish a mural on the east wall. Anna, now 7, stood nearby, singing proudly in front of a small crowd of parents and teachers. Her prosthetic leg, decorated with glitter stickers, caught the sunlight as she moved. She held the microphone with confidence, no longer the quiet child who once whispered from behind Lily's skirt. On a stone bench, at the edge of the garden, Grace Ward watched it all. She looked healthier, still thin, still fragile, but with color in her cheeks and brightness in her eyes. She sipped warm tea, wrapped in a shawl, smiling, as if every wrinkle on her face had been carved by joy. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Lily returned to the classroom to tidy up. While straightening the cubbies, she noticed something inside the wooden desk drawer, an envelope. Her name was written in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. She opened it. Inside, just a single note. Thank you for showing up. I'm not afraid of being alone anymore, because you are home. Her breath caught. The tears came quickly, unannounced, falling gently onto the page. That evening, as golden light bathed the garden behind the center, close friends gathered under string lights and white paper lanterns. The smell of wildflowers and lemon cake floated through the air. There was no grand ceremony, no press, no fanfare. Just children, laughter, and love. Lily stood at the altar in a soft cream dress, barefoot on the grass. Ethan faced her in a linen shirt, his hands slightly trembling as he held hers. They didn't need vows written on paper. Everything had already been said, in sleepless nights, in shared silences, in the way he looked at her now. As he slid the ring onto her finger, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "Lily, you didn't change my life with money. You changed it with humanity." She smiled through the tears. And just then, from behind them, a loud, joyful voice rang out. "We're a real family now," Anna shouted, her arms flung wide. The crowd laughed, and within seconds, the children rushed forward, surrounding Lily and Ethan in a flurry of hugs, giggles, and squeals of joy. Ethan laughed, Lily knelt down, and together, they wrapped their arms around the ones who had made them whole. Not just a happy ending. A beginning. A home. He thought it was just one last blind date. But she changed his life with nothing but kindness. No games. No masks. Just truth, heart, and a little girl who called him family. At Kindness and Love Tales, we believe love can cross any boundary, rich or poor, broken or whole. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales that heal, inspire, and remind us. Sometimes, love shows up when you stop looking and choose to listen instead.